What is up YouTube, and welcome back to How to Get Brutally Strong, episode number 15. This is the last one that I think that's going to be in the series, and for this one we're going to talk about the conjugate method that Louis Simmons, as most of you probably know, are basically the father of, the one who put birth to this method through his work at Westside Barbell. This is probably the training program or the training method that has sparked the most conversation, and a lot of people hate on it, and I think it's partly because they are able to use it properly. It requires a lot of research, most of all, and a lot of personalization, you could say, because you have to really know yourself well to know how you're doing things, to making changes that will benefit you the most. So what is the conjugate method? The conjugate method is a method of which you're using a variety of different stimuluses. You're constantly changing things to avoid what you'll call law of accommodation. So you avoid like running into a brick wall where you don't see progress. So you're constantly changing the stimulus, working on different movements, things like that all the time. Because as Ben Tabachnik said, to adapt to training is never to adapt. So you want to avoid adapting to something, and that way you can constantly evolve by constantly doing something new. So the Westside Barbell were known for using three different stimuluses, ways of training they combined, which were the max effort method, the dynamic effort method, and the repetition effort method. So going over these three, I'm going to start with the max effort method, which is a method of which you are learning to strain maximally, usually working between 1 to 5 reps. 95% of the time you are working up to a single only. If you're going to be using 3 reps, it's going to be for good mornings. Some places I've heard people say 5 reps. I don't know if it's true, but if it's true, it's most likely also for some type of good morning that you work up to a 5 rep max. Now, the way Westside did it was that they worked up to basically a 1 rep max, the heaviest weight they could hit without failing. It's important that you don't fail. You shouldn't be failing reps, but learning how to strain maximally. Now, over the last few years, last decades, 1-2 decades, it's been more known that you can stop around RPE 8 to 9, and you don't have to go all the way to RPE 10 to get the benefits of the max effort method. And that way you're causing less fatigue and decreasing injury risk and things like that. Now, one of the most important things when using the max effort method is rotating exercises. It has been shown that when using the same exercise with above 90% for 3 or more weeks in a row, performance begins to decrease, and for trained people it happens already after 2 weeks with the same exercise. The reason for that is that you're constantly training the same structures. So the pressure points are going to be at the same joint angles in the knee. For example, in the back squat, it's always at the same position, joint angle in the knee, that it's hardest, the same in the angle, and you always bend over the same degree in the squat. Simply by changing to an exercise such as the front squat the next week, you're staying more upright, so you're not putting pressure on your back at the same place. It's going to be hardest in another position at the knee, maybe where the angle are a little bit less, and the same thing in the ankle. So therefore you're not targeting the same structures, the same parts of the nervous system, and that allows you to train with above 90% of your 1 rep max the whole year. The next important thing is choosing the right exercises. You want to choose exercises that are based upon your own weaknesses. So let's say for the squat, you have a weakness in your quads, you might choose to work more on things like front squat and high bar squat and SSB squat, and doing those with bands and chains and with pauses and tempos, rather than using things like low bar squat, box squat, things like that, where you are using more of your posterior chain in the squat. Maybe you're also going to be using less good mornings on your lower body max effort days. One of the most important things as well for the max effort method for it to lead over to competition is that the reps should be around like at least the same length of your competition, like max effort lifts where you're maxing out. The way you are achieving that is by using accommodating resistance, because it evens out the resistance curve and makes it hardest during the whole range of motion. In a squat, for example, it's going to be hardest in the bottom. Like when you get a little bit out of the hole, is where the hardest position is, and then it gets easier on the way up. By using a band, you are adding resistance in the top of the exercise, and therefore the exercise is hardest. It is hard at the bottom and at the top. So therefore the time to complete the rep are going to be longer. Now, because most of us, I know the ones of you watching this video are not on any gear, we're going to have less room to recover, so most of the exercises that we choose will have to be self-limiting, meaning that it's variations where we are able to lift less weight than we would be able to on our competition lift. So we don't want to use all kind of extra gear, things like that, or things that add a lot of momentum, being able to lift more weight by using other bars and things like that assist us. We want to choose things like front squat, SSB squat, pauses and tempos, where we are using less weight, and because less weight is being used, it makes it easier to recover from. Moving on to the dynamic effort method. That is a method of which submaximal weights are lifted with max velocity. And the reason that works to get stronger is because you can produce a higher force output. And the reason you can do that even though you are using less weight than for your max lift is that force is not just related to mass, but also acceleration, aka velocity. So by moving fast with a certain weight, you're actually producing more force than you are doing when lifting slow with max weight. And you really need to really focus on moving fast. And that's why we're using bands and chains. Bands and chains have kinetic energy, so they're going to be pulling you down, which further increases the stretch reflex that you see from yourself by the kinetic energy built up in things like your Achilles tendon and in your knee as well. So as they're moving up, the bands are going to add even more kinetic tension. And what they also do is that they force you to really grind throughout the whole range of motion, because they increases the resistance at the top and evens out the resistance curve. When you're using dynamic effort method, you're working in 3-week pendulum waves. So usually the weight is going to be starting at around 35%, 35, 40%. Then you're doing something like 12 sets of 2 in the first week, then 11 sets of 2 with a bit more weight, and then 10 sets of 2 with some more weight. And the reason that you are moving up in weight and have changes in the sets and reps that you do is to avoid adaptation, because especially with speed work, the time it takes to adapt are really short. So by constantly doing something new, you are never allowing yourself to adapt, which is what we want with the conjugate method. Now, you're also moving like up and down in weight, so, and while changing the reps, and the reason you're doing that as well is to work with around the same workload constantly. So 20 reps total with 40% are going to be very similar to 24 reps total with 32.5%. So within the same 3-week waves, we want the workload to stay similar. But then when you move into a new 3-week wave, you want to work on an exercise where you are stronger, so a variation of your main lift where you are stronger, and therefore 30 to 40% of your 1 rep max are going to be higher. And just the fact that you're going to be using more total weight, even though it's the same percentages you're using, so it's not closer to failure, that means that you'll still see new adaptations and see progressive overload. It will be more stressing on your body. I forgot to mention that obviously the 30 to 40% is without bands or chains, so you want those on as well to add maybe like 10-15% extra weight at the top. The last thing that dynamic effort method allows you to is to master form, because the way that you move when moving fast, the mistakes you make there are the same as you make when you are moving slow with heavy weights. And people would think that this is just technique work, but it's not, because the technique work you're using sub-maximal weights but trying to move with perfect form, and by doing so you're not lifting maximally. When you are producing high force, you're going to see a breakdown in form, and it will be the same that you see in a max effort. So by fixing your form and being able to move perfectly when using the dynamic effort method, you'll also realize that when you can do that, your form on the max effort method is also going to be perfect. Lastly, moving on to the dynamic effort method, the repetition effort method. That is a method of which sub-maximal weights are used until fatigue. And the reason for that is that we can then get maximum motor unit recruitment. All of these are three different ways of getting, you can say, maximum motor unit recruitment, because motor units are actuated in order of the ones that create the lowest amount of power first, that requires the most action potential to get activated, and then the most powerful ones are the ones that get activated at latest, either when we are lifting with maximal intent and moving slow, or we are using a maximal force output. So we can either by having high mechanical tension, which we have over here, and which we get when going to failure here, or by producing a high amount of force where we are activating them as fast as possible. So 3 different ways to gain that maximum motor unit recruitment. So what we're doing here is that we're constantly changing things like exercises. When we see assistance exercises, when we see that we are beginning to see a drop off in progress, let's say you are using the Romanian deadlift as an assistance exercise for your squat and deadlift. So after 4 weeks, you have gone from 5 sets of 5 with 100 kilos, 110, 120, 125, and you're starting to see that the progress is stopping, and you have only been able to do the same thing 2 weeks in a row. So that is when you will change up something in exercises, and most likely, or hopefully, before you have a week with no progress, you are making a change, but the change should not be big. You should still focus on the same muscle group, the same movement, because you have chosen something that is your weakness. But by changing, you're working on an exercise where you're allowing yourself to be able to see progress again, and that way build up. And when that starts to stall, you can again move over to something new. So that is how you are working around the law of accommodation, through these changes in an exercise, for example. Another way is by always changing what is seen as failure. Usually people are just going into an exercise with a certain number of reps they are performing, where they need to get 5 reps in a set, or they need to get 10 reps, 15 reps, and then it is failure when they're going all the way to failure at that. But another way to do it is working with a specific tempo, so not just doing reps and reps, but working with a tempo of 3 seconds down, 3 seconds up, to focus more on the time under tension instead. Another way is time steps, so instead of focus on a specific number of reps or a specific tempo, you are setting a time. You want the set to last 45 seconds and get that time under tension. It doesn't matter if it's fast reps or slow reps. You want to work for 45 seconds with that weight, and that is when you want to choose a weight where you fail after 45 seconds of constant movement. And the last thing is just to choose a random weight where you don't know what you can do with it, and you just go all the way until failure. So that is basically the dynamic effort, the repetition effort method, and what these 3 different methods within Conjugate they entail as a whole. Now I'll move on to the use of accommodating resistance and why it makes sense and what you can use it for. If every one of you watching could quickly do me a favor, that would mean the world to me. For me to be able to continue putting out videos like this and improve the quality and time put into future videos, that requires your help. So if you can either leave a like or a comment on a video, subscribe to the channel, or share my work with a friend, that would be hugely appreciated. For now, back to the video. Accommodating resistance are one of the most important integrations of the Conjugate methods. And I feel like a lot of people don't really know where to start when it comes to using these bands and what the benefits of them are. So that is what I'm going to talk a little bit about. So what is accommodating resistance? And it is where the resistance of an exercise changes throughout the movement throughout the range of motion to match the natural strength curve of the movement. So what we mean by that, resistance are changing throughout the range of motion. So there is a difference in how it usually is, like in the bench press, for example. It's gonna be harder in the bottom and then get a little bit easier at the top. So we might want to add elastic bands to even out that, for example, or in the squat where it's harder at the bottom and easier at the top as well in the squat. So there it also makes sense to use bands. So the resistance curve are changed throughout to match the strength curve of natural strength curve of the movement. So it's matching the natural strength curve because it's making the easiest position harder. That's where it's adding the most resistance, and it's not adding that much resistance in the easiest position, and that way it's matching the natural strength curve in the movement. Now, yes, that's basically what I said. Harder where you are strongest and easier where you are weakest. There's two types of accommodating resistance you can use. We have bands and we have chains, and they have some differences. Bands will create kinetic energy. So as you're going down, they have built up tension from when you were at the top. So they're going to add, even on top of the fact that they're already pulling you down, they also have built up tension. So they're going to pull back with an even greater force than what they already have. Right? Think of it like when you're going down fast, you create this stretch in your chin belt fast, which allows you to jump faster or squat more. And that is what bands really are accentuating by making that more significant. The thing with bands is that because of this kinetic energy, they are always pulling you down, so you actively have to fight even when at the top, more so than just the weight on the bar. And then with bands as well, the weight is not just increasing linearly, but exponential. So maybe for the first 20 centimeter, you're moving up, it's increasing by 5 kilos, but maybe the last 20 centimeters, the resistance is increasing by 10 kilos. So it's not just a linear increase in weight, but exponential, which is also really beneficial when it comes to strengthening that top part of the movement, or the weakest part of the movement in general. I mean the strongest part of the movement, by having the majority of the resistance added there. With chains, they don't actively pull you down, they're just heavier at the top, they don't have that kinetic energy, and it's also just a linear resistance increase. It's going to be the same amount of chain that is pulled off from the floor every, let's say 10 seconds. So when it comes to using bands and chains, there are a few different ways that you can use it, two in particular. And the first one is the alignment method. With this one, we have the bands coming from the top. So let's say you're doing a bench press. So now it's taking weight off, which means usually you might only be able to lift 180 kilos, but now you could maybe have 220 kilos on the bar if you're using a really heavy band. So you put 220 on the bar, and in the bottom, it might help, let's say something like, what do I know, like 60 kilos. Maybe the bands are assisting you with 60 kilos there, and then at the top, they're only assisting you with 30 kilos. So during the part where you are the weakest, again, you're getting the most help. When you are the strongest, you're getting the least help. But what this method allows you to, because you can use more weight than you usually would be able to, is that I just said that the first one it allows you to lift weights above your max, and because of that, you learn to handle and feel heavier weight, and that can be beneficial for breaking plateaus because you want to feel what a heavier weight is like just to have it in your hands. Even though the band are obviously taking off some weight, it means that you can experience literally having heavier weights in your hands at the top still. Because, as I just said, maybe your max is 180. Now the band is taking off, let's say, down to 160 kilo at the bottom, 190 at the top. So you still get to feel 160 kilo, 190 kilo at the top. So that's 220 on the bar, and the band takes off 30. So it's a 30 kilo decrease, and it's still 10 kilo more than you have lifted before that you're feeling at the top. So one of the most important things when using this, the lightheaded method, is using the correct amount of accommodating resistance. By using too much, it can basically become ego lifting because it's totally taking off all resistance. You can have 200 kilo on the bar, and the band might be taking off over half the weight if it's a really strong band or a lot of bands that you're using. So that you don't want to do, you want it to be minor, maybe 10-20% of what you're lifting being taken off, so that you just have that feel of more weight rather than just being able to put 600 pounds on the bar and moving that up and down because the band is basically doing all the work. Then we also have the overload method, and this is the one where the band or chain comes from the bottom and the one you want to use the most. The lighted method, because it allows you to overload with more weight on the bar, and then in that way like lighten the weight on the that you have on the on the bar itself, that it feels like. You don't want to use much because it's gonna be more fatiguing, and don't create the same thing in terms of the kinetic energy and exponential resistance from the bottom where you have to accelerate through. I mean, you still have to do that the other way around, but it's just reversed so that you can have more weight on the bar, while when you add a band in the overload method, you have less weight on the bar but are overloading with the band instead. And I've said that many times, it's gonna be harder at the top, and the band pulls you down constantly. So we have that going on, which we don't have up here, and then you have more stretch reflex. But you could say that you're also getting that here because the band is obviously still pulling you up, and you have to on the way down you have to fight more against the band, right? But it's gonna be more pronounced in this because again, the kinetic energy pulling you down, you have to fight that, and if you're deciding not to fight it, which often for the West side is what they did, they used it to their advantage, where a lot of them actually had more total weight, and because of the elastic bands, they actually moved way faster than they did with less weight, which is a huge thing and really shows the effectiveness of using the bands and really the effect of the stretch reflex. So yeah, for accommodating with systems, this is everything. Let's move on to the last part of this video. The last thing that the conjugate method has going for it are working on accessories, general physical preparation and conditioning. And this might honestly be the most important because they talk about it as the things allowing you to use heavier weights, like by having a dumbbell press that has a certain strength, or tricep extension that has a certain strength, you basically unlock the ability to lift a certain weight in the bench press. And one way to use your accessories is to see that, let's say you want to be as strong as someone. If you cannot dumbbell press the same as him, that is probably a weakness, and you should work on that, because that is going to allow you to basically at least have the same chest strength. Maybe by being able to do as much in flies, you are allowing yourself to having a chance of bench pressing the same amount of weight as someone who are right now bench pressing more than you. So how do you choose accessories? You do that based on weaknesses. And again, it's where you can see that, okay, this guy benches more than me. They actually have the same chest strength, but he has more tricep strength than me when doing the same exercises. So my chest is not a weakness, but my triceps is, and that is what I should work on. And what is important is that you need to understand that you have to mix it up constantly. Whenever you start to stall, you can change from the rolling dumbbell extension that West Side like to do, where you do like skull crushes on the floor and let the dumbbell roll to get an even bigger stretch. When that stops working, maybe you change to push downs, maybe you change to overhead tricep extension, maybe you change to something with one arm at the same time. Maybe you change to JM press, something like that. But they will always open up new space for adaptations to take place when you switch it around. And remember, also focusing on a lot of different parts of the repetition method, where you are maybe sometimes you're doing straight sets, high reps, sometimes you're doing tempos, sometimes you're doing time sets, sometimes you're just doing reps, stuff like that. Always mix it up for the best possible results if you're using something that are similar to the conjugate method. Yeah, and then for conditioning, some of the things that did at Westside were absolutely insane, the volume they did. And it's something they not talk about a lot. You don't hear it as much mentioned out in other forums on things like Instagram and YouTube. You hear the most people mostly talk about the max effort and dynamic effort method, because the repetition effort method, let's be honest, we just see it as bodybuilding. But some of the things they did, like Lewis Simmons talked about doing dumbbell pressing for 5 minutes straight with just 20 to 30% of his 1 rep max. So he was just doing it in a slow tempo for 5 minutes straight, like 5 seconds down, and again 5 seconds up for 20 to 30 seconds at a time. That is it. For 5 minutes at a time. Do you understand how much time that is? Like, that is fucking wild to think about. But things like that they did on the sled, talk about how the weightlifter Alexeyev, he would do 1,000 leg raises at the pool. He would do a ton of jerks, like push presses overhead, stuff like that, hundreds of reps in a short amount of time. And the purpose of that, one of the things, is to increase your work capacity. So the work capacity is basically how much volume you can recover from, how much also you can do within a session and still feel fine and not feel totally destroyed. So it will speed up your recovery and allow you to do more in training and in future trainings. And especially for something like strongman or powerlifting, it is important so that you don't, in your just energy systems in general, feel fatigued going into the deadlift. A lot of people, if they have poor work capacity, they will perform bad on the deadlift, even though it's really good in training. It's the lift that is going to be impacted the most in competition if you have a really bad work capacity, because even though the squat obviously are targeting some of the same muscles, bench press are totally different, but you're working your body as one total unit with things like your carbohydrates, nervous system and stuff like that. So having a better work capacity and a better use of your nutrients in your body are going to allow for better recovery and better performance in competition. So one of the things they used to speed up that recovery and add in extra volume for, what could you say, conditioning, GPP, and in general hypertrophy, where they trained muscles that recover faster, because the usual training was just 4 days a week with a max effort day for the lower body, dynamic effort day for the lower body, max effort day for upper body, and dynamic effort day for lower body, and all days would be followed up by the repetition effort method for either upper or lower body. But some muscles take shorter than these 72 hours that they had in between training the same body parts. So for example, for the arms, sometimes they would do mini workouts in between of training the triceps or the biceps with bands especially. It's something they love, and Louis Simmons made popular the bands for really just doing a lot of stuff like with 20 to 30% of the max, just doing a lot of banded extensions and banded curls. And when it's so light, it's not really fatiguing, but more recovery enhancing, because it adds so much blood to the muscles. Think about when you are doing an exercise that are hardest here in the shortened position, you get kind of an restriction of blood to the area. So when you straighten out, then a lot of blood flows into the area, and shortened exercises where it's hardened in this shortened position are what is contributing more to the pump. So you might get a pump feeling, but it's going to be really fast to recover from and can flush out some of that negative soreness that you have from a previous training, and really like sort out that inflammation. I would not say a lot faster, but at least a bit faster. And who doesn't want to be able to do anything they can to recover faster and improve the training? So that is all for how to get brutally strong, episode 15. I hope that you have enjoyed this series. I'm going to have some different types of content planned, more like cheer lists. I have planned for different things like handstand push-ups, different programs, like sets and reps methods, stuff like that, where I'm going to be ranking those with my honest opinion. And then I think I'm going to move into some different kind of content. Maybe get a camera where I can actually put my mics on, because they are a lot better than the terrible noise that I have from this camera, even though it's good. It's just old and I can't add a microphone to the ones that I have. So that is honestly really annoying, because it's a superb camera. I can't speak right now, it's too late. I need to get to bed. But yeah, a lot of new stuff. I want to talk more, make more videos where I talk about like specific exercises that I'm doing and show clips to like while I'm talking, stuff like that, inspired by people like Alex Leonidas, but a little bit just like personalized still, and not just taking off his style, but talking about topics that really interest me, and some of the things I do just in my training that are my own philosophies and things I think works really well. So I'm excited for that and the changing content, and I hope you are too. I'll see you all.